9 experienced hikers, a tent sliced open from the inside, footprints leading away into a blizzard, and then nothing. When their bodies were found weeks later, Soviet doctors noted injuries they compared to the force of a major car crash. But there was no car. There was no avalanche debris. There was no sign of another person anywhere near that slope. The official Soviet investigation closed the case with 4 words that have haunted historians ever since: a compelling natural force. That was 1959. No one has improved on that answer since. So what actually happened on the night of February 1st on a remote Ural mountain the local Mansi people called, loosely translated, the Dead Mountain? This file was never closed. Today we're opening it. Case file. So 3, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. Let's start with who these people were, because that matters. This was not a group of amateurs who stumbled into the wilderness unprepared. Igor Dyatlov was 23 years old and already a seasoned expedition leader. The 8 others, 7 men and 2 women, were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk, which today is the city of Yekaterinburg. They were athletes. They were trained. Several had completed equally difficult winter treks before. Their goal was to reach a peak called Otorten, roughly 10 days of skiing and hiking through the northern Urals in the dead of a Soviet winter. It was classified as a Category 3 expedition, the highest difficulty rating at the time. These were exactly the kind of people you'd want with you if something went wrong. And something went very wrong. The group set out from the city in late January 1959. They traveled by train, by truck, and then on skis, moving deeper into terrain that saw almost no human traffic. On February 1st, according to their own diaries and photographs recovered later, they were making their way up the slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl, which in the Mansi language means, depending on the translation, Dead Mountain or Mountain of the Dead. They had intended to camp on the other side of that slope, but the weather was closing in. They miscalculated their position slightly and set up camp on an open incline exposed to the wind. It wasn't ideal, but experienced winter campers deal with worse. They ate dinner. They made entries in their journals. One group diary entry was sardonic, even funny. They joked about the cold and their sore muscles. By all evidence, they went to sleep like any other night on the trail. They were never seen alive again. When the group failed to check in at their destination and then failed to return to Sverdlovsk on schedule, search parties were organized. Rescuers reached the campsite on February 26th. What they found stopped them cold. The tent was still standing, partially collapsed under snow, but standing. Their skis, their food, their equipment were all inside or nearby. Nobody had packed up to leave. And then rescuers noticed the tent wall itself. It had been sliced open from the inside. Not unzipped, cut. Someone inside that tent had taken a knife and cut their way out through the fabric rather than use the entrance. From the inside, in the middle of the night, in minus 30 degrees Celsius. And then they ran. Investigators followed footprints down the slope. The prints of multiple people, some in socks, some apparently barefoot. The prints led about a mile from the tent toward a tree line near a frozen river valley, and in the tree line they started finding bodies. The first 2 victims were found at the edge of the forest, near a large cedar tree. The branches of that tree had been broken high up, as if someone had climbed it, reportedly to look back toward the camp. Small fire had been attempted nearby. Both men showed signs of hypothermia as the likely direct cause of death. Their hands were damaged, consistent with attempting to build a fire or grip branches in extreme cold. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar tree and the tent, positioned as though they had been trying to make their way back to camp and collapsed. Igor Dyatlov himself was among them, found frozen, face turned toward the tent he had left. But it was the final four, discovered 2 months later, buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine about 200 feet from the cedar tree, that generated the most disturbing questions. Those 4 showed injuries that investigators and forensic experts described as severe internal trauma. Fractured ribs, a fractured skull. One of the women, Lyudmila Dubinina, was found missing her tongue and the soft tissue around her eyes. The Soviet medical examiner concluded those injuries were consistent with a massive compressive force, but found no corresponding external wounds, no bruising on the skin that you would expect from such an impact. Then there was the clothing. Dosimeter readings reportedly found elevated radiation levels on the garments of at least 2 of the victims. The Soviet investigation noted this, and then moved on. Decades of investigators, journalists, scientists, and amateur researchers have proposed explanations, and none of them has fully closed this case. One theory suggests a paradoxical undressing phenomenon, a well-documented effect of severe hypothermia in which victims feel intensely hot and remove their clothing, could explain why several hikers were found with fewer layers than expected. That's verified medical science, but it doesn't explain why they cut open their tent in the first place or the internal injuries. An avalanche theory has been proposed and studied seriously, including a 2021 paper published by Swiss researchers who used computer modeling to suggest a specific type of small, delayed slab avalanche could have struck the tent without leaving the kind of debris typically associated with avalanches. Some scientists consider this plausible. Critics note the slope's angle is below typical avalanche thresholds, and that experienced hikers would likely have recognized the risk. A theory involving infrasound, low-frequency sound waves generated by wind moving over terrain in specific ways, has been suggested to explain possible panic and disorientation. It remains speculative and unproven. Soviet-era theories ranged from a military test gone wrong to a confrontation with escaped prisoners from a nearby gulag system, to involvement by the indigenous Mansi people, a claim that was investigated and abandoned for lack of any evidence. One theory suggests the group may have witnessed or been inadvertently exposed to a Soviet military test of some kind, and that the case was partially suppressed. The radiation detail keeps that theory alive, but no declassified Soviet document has confirmed it. The Russian government reopened the investigation in 2019. In 2020, they announced their official conclusion: a snow avalanche. Not everyone accepted that. Here is what we know for certain. 9 experienced, capable people abandoned a secure shelter in a life-threatening blizzard in the middle of the night without taking supplies, without dressing properly, and without using the normal exit. 4 of them sustained injuries whose cause has never been definitively explained. Radiation was detected on clothing. The Soviet investigation was closed quickly under a vague and unprecedented official finding. And despite more than 60 years of scrutiny by journalists, scientists, governments, and independent researchers, no single theory has explained every verified element of what happened that night. The mountain is still there. The case file is still open. 9 people walked up a slope in a Soviet winter, and history still can't tell us why only the mountain came back unchanged. Was it a freak natural event that lined up in the worst possible way? Was it something the Soviet government preferred to keep quiet? Or is there something about that night that simply doesn't fit any explanation we currently have? The Cold Archive never closes a file. What do you think happened? Tell us in the comments, and subscribe because the next file is already open.